Welcome to the 2015 St. Gallen Wings of Excellence Award session. What is the next small, big thing? We've picked 4 brilliant ideas from our leaders of tomorrow, and it's time to put them to the test. Our board of top-notch judges and you will select the 2 best ideas to be the next small, big thing for a follow-up session tomorrow. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the head of the jury and your host of the session, Riz Khan.
Ladies and gents, a packed house, a good sign. What is the next small, big thing? I was thinking about this. I think it's me. because I'm 12 kilograms lighter than I was when I came here last year. So I guess I'm smaller. Don't clap yet, because I'm still 110 kilos, so I'm still big. So maybe I'm the next smaller big thing. I don't know, but anyway. But you'll notice my suit is actually in the colours of St. Gallen. This is no accident, see? Look at this. This is loyalty for you. Philip, where are you? And I have to say, you know, it's really been nice to be associated with the St. Gallen Symposium for 8 years now, because I've met so much talent. And it's incredibly creative talent, because I think to some of the stories I hear, I mean, the Wings of Excellence competition, for example, I heard about one of the winners, a couple of years on, hadn't found work, was struggling to find a job, but was very creative. And this person had kind of a business background, business degree, no medical experience, but decided to open a medical clinic. And it said, 50 euros, I'll cure anything. I'll cure anything. If I don't cure you, I'll give you 100 euros back. So this doctor happened to see this and think, this is a cheek. What's going on here? I'm going to make money out of this guy. So he went into this clinic and said, I can't taste anything. I can't taste anything. And this former student said, nurse, go to the cabinet, get box 22, bottle number 3, and put 3 drops on the patient's tongue. So the nurse went there, got box 22, bottle number 3, and onto this doctor patient's tongue, put 3 drops. He went, this isn't medicine, this is petrol. Oh, you got your taste back. The doctor was really upset, really upset. He said, okay, I've got to get my money back. Went back a couple of days later. I can't remember anything. I can't remember anything. No problem. Nurse, go to the cabinet, please. Get box 22, get bottle number 3, and put a couple of drops on his tongue. He said, wait a minute, I thought that was for taste. Oh, memory's back. So this guy, the doctor was really upset. He said, I've got to get this guy, I've got to get this. Went back the 3rd time, a few days later. He said, my eyesight's going. My eyesight's really going. It's getting really bad. I can't see anything. And this guy said, oh, you know what? I don't have anything to cure that. And the doctor said, really? He said, no, I'm going to have to give you 100 euros. He said, oh, good. Gave him a note. He said, wait a minute, that's only a 50 euro note. Got your eyesight back. So one thing I can tell you, it's a very creative group of students from this university. This is a very new and unique session we've got here, and it's a very interesting one, and I'm very proud to be part of this. We've had hundreds of ideas collected through the St. Gallen Wings of Excellence competition, the essay competition. Now, you have to keep in mind, it's not really just an essay competition. It's really an incubator of sorts, incubator full of ideas. So after, apart from the essay winners that we have that have been felicitated over the last couple of days, we thought we've got so many great ideas here. We have to think of this theme of what is the next small big thing. And after hundreds and hundreds of entries, intense round of voting, community voting, you're all involved in this, 8 rounds of reviews, a selection that really was quite rigorous, we came up with 4 ideas. And that has led to 4 ideas, 4 essays, and 4 what I would call, I guess, contestants for this session. So over the next hour, you're going to see basically a short video on each, giving you a bit of background on them, then a 3-minute pitch or presentation of this idea by each one of them. And I have to point out, as judges, myself and my fellow judges, I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, have not seen these ideas. So we're judging from a completely brand new perspective, if you like, clean perspective. And we'll have a vote after that, and I ask you to get your smartphones, keep them handy, because after we've done all this review of the ideas, it's going to take about an hour, we want you to vote. We want you to be able to give us an idea on which you think are the 2 ideas that should go forward to the kind of follow-up session tomorrow. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But it's not that there's winners and losers. Everyone who's entered the competition right from the start, the hundreds of essays, they're all winners in effect, but we want to pick a few and highlight them. And here we have 2 that we want to pick out of the 4 for our contestants, just to make it a little competitive and energetic and dynamic as well. Let me first of all introduce the two judges I have. I'm on the judging panel of 3, and I'm your host as well for this. We also have with us Tebe Ikalafeng, who's coming from South Africa. Round of applause, please. He's the founder and chairman of the Brand Leadership Group, and it does a wide variety of brand strategy and valuation. And in fact, worked with major companies such as Colgate-Palmolive in New York, and actually Nike in South Africa. They didn't know whether to sign the contract with him. He said, just do it. And the rest is history. We also have with us Stefan Chambers, who is of the Oxford Said Business School and chair of the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship. He, I think, is the troublemaker in our judging panel, so watch out for him. A round of applause for him, please. So, as I say, we'll have a little vote. I'm not going to say any more. In fact, our little videos introduce our wonderfully talented contestants too. We'll get on with the show, and I'm going to step off and ask the first video to be played, and then we'll get our first contestant up.
I'm Martha Renberg. I study at Copenhagen Business School. Double degree, one in political economy and the other in international management. I'm an environmentalist by heart, so I think that I would try to enlighten people that our current economic system is not viable. But lately there's so long distance between each pillar. Extraction is one place, processing is another, and consumption is another. And so we've lost sense of where we're coming from and how our products around us are created. I didn't know what I wanted before I started studying, really. I just know I want to save the planet. But the way how I'm going to do it will always change. I'm interested in disruption and technology. Disruption, as I believe, that is what is needed to our current economic system to deal with some of the most complex issues of our time. And technology, as I believe that's how we'll get there. So the last couple of months, I've been looking into emerging technologies that combine fundamentals of artificial intelligence with big data. Technologies that one day, not long from now, could generate solutions to some of these big issues. Quantum computing, prescriptive analytics, affective computing are some potential candidates. And what I believe stand to make or break these technologies is not necessarily the hardware, but the software. And the software is us. Will we be able to ask the right questions to these technologies? Create the right context for them to operate in? Will we be able to choose when not to use these technologies? The next small big thing in my point of view is technological intuition. So you've heard of big data. As an executive, it's probably been pitched to you as a tool with which to run current operations more efficiently. As a policymaker, make your policies more fact-based and therefore legitimate. As an academic, your research more credible. And maybe as an entrepreneur, you wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for big data. But now more than ever, you are faced with information overload. And that is also why artificial intelligence, if it hasn't already, becomes your friend. Artificial intelligence filters and categorizes data according to dominant beliefs of what constitutes good performance. So on a smaller scale, your Siri app or Google app is a great example of how this filtering process takes place, and it's actually a credible source of information. But my question is, on a grander scale, when you set a quantum computer to look into environmental degradation or social inequality, do you really want the dominant belief? Or do you in fact want the outlier data? Or better, do you want data at all? Note, I'm not a quantum physicist nor an engineer, but standing here today talking about technology, I prove my point. Technology is increasingly embedded in our society and requires an embedded dialogue. Asking the right questions, context, choosing when not to use the technology is an ability required by all of us. Technological intuition is required by all of us, and certainly leaders like yourselves.
Thank you, Martha. So we have 15 minutes with you to deliberate on your idea and see how that might be applied. I'm going to ask my fellow judges, Tebe and Stefan, to comment on their thoughts initially on how this works. Big data, of course, everyone's talking about it. What do you make of what Martha says about how it can be used and how this idea of technological intuition might develop?
Well, I'm a bit of a big data skeptic, so I'm delighted to hear the collision of the word intuition with big data. I mean, big data strikes me as often neither big nor having much to do with data. But on the other hand, it's absolutely clear that if we had big enough data sets and applied enough processing to them, extraordinary correlations would come out of that, which would allow us to improve the state of the world. So I guess my first question is, you're an environmentalist, you care about social justice. Where do the data sets come from that you can then apply your intuition, your notion of intuition, and let's say quantum computing? In other words, unimaginably powerful computing. Where do the data sets come from? And who owns them? I guess those are my questions for you.
Right. So first of all, what I think is interesting with regards to big data combined with artificial intelligence is what underlying assumptions you're looking for. So the politicians today talk about GDP growth, GDP per capita, and the question is, what are these hierarchies of priorities? With regards to environmental degradation, that is what I'm interested in. If we use GDP as a KPI, if you want, its output equals K, capital, labor, and technological innovation in the long run. And we'll be able to perfect these, okay? So we'll be able to look into capital and see ways with which we can dematerialize the economy. Dematerialize is important to extract less resources from the environment. But I think that that's not enough. We had other contestants from the audience that talked about humanism and talked about, I've talked to colleagues about social progress indexes, different KPIs, and using big data to actually try to populate these areas better.
Tibet?
You know, as an African, naturally, when I hear words like humanism, I smile, because the basis of African society is humanity and treating other people as you treat yourself. But I'm also quite intrigued as an environmentalist. You know, I serve on the board of WWF, and we're always struggling about this harmonization of man and the environment. But I'm from an emerging market, and I'm hearing all this. I'm asking myself the question, my everyday struggles are about bread and food on the table. How is all this stuff, which is going to go over the 1 billion African heads, going to fit into their world?
Right. So I could come with a concrete example because you brought food to the table, literally, to say that in the Western societies, half of our foods are wasted. From grocery stores, from restaurants, half of our foods are wasted, whilst in the global South, people are starving. Using big data to better be able to forecast demands and need correctly, and therefore reduce wastage. But these need to be, I mean, this is what you need to be looking for. You need to ask these questions actively and not passively, right?
Well, and how, by the way, how are you going to do this? Because, you know, the other challenges, you know, about our emerging markets, whether it's Africa or Asia, well, it's always Big Brother West looking down to little struggling Africa and India, trying to help them. How are you going to involve, I'm thinking about your idea, how are you going to bring about all these other countries who actually need that, which sounds interesting,
right.
Who need that, to be partner, not a beneficiary, or not just a taker of this?
Right. Let me just state that I'm not a proponent of big data. I'm actually wanting us to be critical towards the emerging technologies that will be able to use big data to generate solutions for us. And so vast amounts of data that we will never be able to do sanity check of this data because it will take too long time. And this is the underlying with quantum computers. Having that said, so the assumption is that big data and information will decrease in cost and become increasingly available also for the global South. So that goes to your question that I didn't address, that who owns the data? I think Bruno Frey raised a really good point earlier that the world is no longer complex because we have information, right? We have the data, and the data is decreasing in cost. And I think it will be up to both the global South and the global North, if that is the dichotomy that we're using these days, to use it.
But let's accept that interrogating unimaginably vast amounts of data with sufficiently powerful tools will give us answers which will themselves improve the state of the world. Let's assume that that's true. We have to have the data, and it has to have been collected, and it has to be owned by people in whose interest it is to give it away such that those inquiries can happen. Do you agree?
Yes, assuming that you're a proponent for using big data. And that is exactly, I mean, I'm happy you raised this point because we need codified and standardized data to use it. And that's also why people are not everybody is successful in using big data because it's not standardized. So let's say we start standardizing data today, and that's what we're going to use as basis for our decision making. Do we then not use the data that has been during the 20th century? Do we not look back and see the role of technology? And this is really what I'm getting at, that we all engage in the role of technology, historically. In high school, I did history of wars, and I would have taken a course as well in technological history, and to understand how technology is playing an increasing role for us, so that we can learn when not to use technology and when to use technology.
Martha, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt quickly and just touch on partly what Tebe and Stefan talked about, and that is the way that there is obviously a technological divide in the world. Leapfrogging of technology in certain countries has helped them catch up. We've seen mobile phones in places where there isn't running water and food supplies in abundance. Does your model, does your idea and your proposal take into account the technological divide that exists in terms of the way data comes together, the way that technological intuition is developed, taking into account the disparity across the world? Does there have to be a balancing first before any real model can be established, or can it be done on the fly, so to speak?
I believe it does, and I think the points that you're raising is on a meta level talking about power structures globally. And I believe that before, where we talked about wealth distribution a lot, we talk about it in a monetary sense, and that is what creates the power divides, access to capital. Today, maybe it's more, and going forward, increasingly access to technology and access to an understanding of technology.
I loved when you started, you said you went to university. You didn't know what you're talking about until you got to university. Now that you've been to varsity and you're doing your second master's on it, this idea, is this theory or is this thing going to work?
I'm sorry?
Is it theory or is this thing going to work? Does it sound like a beautiful theoretical idea, concept, or is it an idea which you can implement?
And actually, that was my question was, who's going to implement this? How can it be done next? What's the next step?
Well, the task for us was posed, state something that is under the radar, or not on the radar of political decision makers. And I believe this isn't. And I see that there's a risk that when we talk about technology, we'll let engineers talk about technology and not let us also be part of that dialogue. And so often politicians will base their decisions on the ground of expertise, knowledge, right? And now when you talk about artificial intelligence, you have Hollywood stating that it is an existential threat to humanity. Actually, I believe the largest threat is the regulatory threat, that people around us, that we are not aware of the impacts of this technology, and there is hysteria, and that the politicians will formulate policies accordingly. So yes, it's not a theoretical thing. I mean, it is a theoretical thing. I would start with schools. Talk about how we can talk about technology in schools.
So are you, just to make sure I completely understood this, are you talking about consciousness raising around data? Are you talking about getting everyone's relative sophistication to the point where they neither exchange their data on poor terms for service, nor have their data compromised by government? Is that what you're talking about, a social movement around data sophistication?
Yes, I believe that we need to have access to a proper and civilized understanding of technology. Just to go back a couple of steps, to say the link between big data and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has existed since the 60s. It's the science of mimicking human beings. In order to successfully do so, you need data. And that's why artificial intelligence is gaining ground today. And artificial intelligence technologies is growing exponentially today. And when these trickle into our business, our homes, we need to be ready to ask the critical questions, to actively ask these technologies to look for what we believe are the problems.
How are you going to overcome, and you mentioned it, you talked about political leadership or government and all those. How are you going to overcome that obvious obstacle that's going to come in front of you, from a legislative way to implementation, all that? I guess, and the question goes a little bit to what you said, Stephen, whether this is just activism or whether this is an organized
Structured.
A systematic way of implementing change.
I'm afraid of saying, you know, let's have a think tank and let's all think about this. So incremental steps, right? And I mentioned schools before. I think it's important to have a dialogue early on with our kids about the role of technology.
John Norton published on Sunday a call for a Magna Carta for data on the anniversary of the Magna Carta. Sounds to me you got there first.
Yeah, exactly. No, but to get back to one of my points made is that I'm not an engineer. That's the point. I've been, you know, trying to take a crash course in quantum physics the last months to get into the understanding of quantum computing. It's been a challenge, but I do believe that I have a say in this. I want to be part of formulating the questions. I want to be part of formulating the context so that we actually use these technologies to the better. And we also are aware of when we're not supposed to use the technologies and use our own technology.
My last question on that. I was just going to say, you're not a quantum physicist, you're not an engineer. So what are you in this whole role, in this entire thing?
Vested human being.
I dare to say I speak for my generation, leaders of today. We don't like labels.
Good answer.
Good answer. Good answer.
One point for slapping down the judge. So, okay, a quick thought. When you were putting together this idea and you were writing this essay, you know, give us a frank behind the scenes. Where did you see the cracks in this idea? Where do you see the biggest issues and problems?
I see the biggest issue in we give data, particularly quantitative data, a lot of credibility. And when we're faced with technology that can manage data to an extent that we cannot, we will just accept the solutions at face value because we are educated that quantitative data is more credible than qualitative data. Now, the case is that these technologies actually also take into consideration qualitative data, but they don't question the underlying assumptions of our economic system, for example. And I'm afraid that we will just accept the solutions generated by quantum computing or whatever hardware is the one that will gain ground, rather than question it. Because we will never be able to do a sanity check. It's too much data.
Isn't there also the issue that, ironically, in comfortable and developed world societies, there's almost a dumbing down of people. I mean, they've gone for entertainment, infotainment, and less education and kind of awareness raising. How do you battle something like that when you have society that's empowered but not, you know, empowering itself? How do you get around that? Is there any way? I mean, how can you say educating children? I mean, I think that's absolutely key. But how do we get around the kind of Kardashian culture? And, you know.
Okay, so how to make us all nerds in a way and not agnostic about the developments of technology? I think definitely popular media helps to raise awareness. Hollywood helps to raise awareness about artificial intelligence, but we need to take up that dialogue. And I think that policymakers have a big say in it, and also leaders like yourself to populate this and demystify this technology so that we don't let the hysteria take over, that it's an existential threat. It's not. These machines are intelligent, but they're not sentient. We are sentient.
Well, ironically, Stephen Hawking just now said we're all going to be overrun by robots, but that's a little worrying. Any other thoughts? We've got a couple of minutes.
I mean, I think you'd have a very receptive audience amongst the people who care about the open data movement, amongst people who care about Code Academy, amongst people who care about improving the world, because there is no question that you can't do it without evidence, and there is no question that that evidence gets harder to interpret, and that we have there's an imperative for us to become data intuitive or data literate in a way that we are clearly not.
Right. Quick final thought, David.
You're quite passionate about this. You're a passionate person. If we take Martha out of this, and this idea never ever happens, are we going to be worse off as a people?
Yes, you'll see isomorphism and no innovation.
That's such a big word, Martha. Does everybody else know isophism? I don't even know that. I can't even say it.
You'll say status quo. You'll see continuous not invented here syndrome. I don't think that you will see innovation, and innovation in the true sense, not in the GDP growth formula, technological innovation. you will not see innovation to our current economic system, the disruption that I was supposed to take myself out of it, but that I'm a proponent of.
Martha, we want to thank you very much. Well done, and thanks for being first up as well. And that's the cue for our next video, and our next contestant.
My name is Marek Hlaváč. I'm from Slovakia. I'm a PhD candidate in political economy and government at Harvard University. The revolutions of 1989 happened when I was 3. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to, say, travel freely, or certainly not as freely as I could today. A lot of your fate is determined by the country that you were born into. I think human welfare could be much improved if there were fewer restrictions on where people can choose to live, what they can choose to do with their lives.
Good evening, everybody. I am here to convince you that the next big, small thing is the international division of labor in the provision of public services. Countries should be providing services not just to their own citizens, but could also provide services to citizens of other countries. And in particular, they could specialize in providing the kinds of services that they can deliver at the lowest opportunity cost. Now, why is this a big, small idea? Well, the idea is small because it applies an already well-tested and well-known principle of comparative advantage beyond its usual policy domains, beyond the usual settings of military cooperation or private trade. It is also a big idea because it can extend these well-tested principles far beyond what has become common and what we have become used to. Now, dividing up the provision of public services internationally will bring us at least 3 great benefits. Firstly, and most importantly, it will allow us to obtain better services at a much lower cost. You will see economies of scale happen as countries specialize. You might see economies of scope as countries will tend to provide clusters of related public services. The second benefit we would get from this international division of labor in the provision of public services would be an increased stature for small states on the international scene. Many small countries will be able to develop expertise in particular areas and will be able to provide services related to these areas to many more countries, making themselves much more important in a way that is very natural and stimulates genuine national pride. We've spoken about nationalism versus patriotism before. Finally, and relatedly, it would allow us to obtain more credible collective security guarantees. A country that provides a service for many of its partners and neighbors is a country you cannot afford to lose if it finds itself in danger. Let me illustrate this with a concrete example. Let's think about the country of Estonia. The small Baltic state has become a world leader in digital governance and cybersecurity. There are plenty of things you can do electronically in Estonia that you will not be able to do in any other country. There's a digital birth certificate. When you're born in Estonia, you get a digital identity, and you get automatically enrolled into the country's health insurance scheme, for instance. At age 15, the government gives you a digital ID card, which you can use for electronic signatures, which you can also use to complete transactions. Needless to say, Estonia is far ahead of any other European country when it comes to digital governance and cybersecurity. There's also no reason to believe that any other European country would catch up to Estonia anytime soon. So why not just let Estonia provide these services for everybody. We would get much better digital services in plenty of European countries, plenty of partner countries, at a much lower cost. Estonia would see its importance on the international stage rise, and rise dramatically. And finally, especially in these trying times, allowing Estonia to provide a lot of its services to partner states would increase Estonia's security. I think the international division of labor in the provision of public services is the way of the future. We are, all of us, most of us maybe all of us, are future policymakers or people who will have an influence on public policy. We should make this happen. And if you agree with me that getting better services at a lower cost, having a more equitable distribution of power on the international scene, and better collective security is something we're striving for, I would encourage you to support my proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek. And you open it up to the judges.
Well, I like the idea. You know, we're just talking earlier about a small country like Kenya, which has got about 50 million or so people, and the idea of M-Pesa, which is now the Vodafone standard for mobile money transfer. But while I like the idea, I'm also quite intrigued by what you said in the beginning, that ideas are shaped by where you come from. I probably want to say, I'm wondering if they're also limited by where you come from. That's the one question. Whether let's say Estonia, for example, we talk about digital government, whether the complexity or the lack thereof of Estonia will not be applicable in a more complex state like America, for example. That's just one question. But my real question is, I'm worried about countries specializing. So for the last 400 years, America has specialized in America, isn't it? And has taken America and planted America everywhere else in the world, isn't it? You look at the world's top 100 most valuable brands, 80% of them are American, as are all ideas, all the way down to social, to culture. So if we go with your idea, are we not running the risk of making the world bland and taking away from, one, the differentiation and the excitement of what makes us such a dynamic universe? And second, the very point that you talked about, the threat, you said it will reduce security. I'm worried. I'm actually worried that, no, it's going to increase security risk, because now the Estonians have planted the entire system into my country, and they know exactly what I'm doing.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm glad you like the general idea, and I think you raised some very important points. On your first point, you spoke about the danger of maybe too much standardization. I think that can be counteracted in several ways. One of them is a point you made already, which is this point of diversity, right? There will be a countervailing force with creative people from different backgrounds, different countries, having their own ways of doing things that then can enrich partner states. There's also one important point about specialization, which I think gets at the issue of having too much of the same thing everywhere, which is that if you think about comparative advantage, it simply shouldn't happen that one country will end up doing everything. There will be different countries will face different opportunity costs for the services they provide, and if the system is well managed, if you think about it well enough, you will not end up in a situation where, say, the United States or some other dominant state, or perhaps even some other state that has absolute advantage that can just produce many things at a low cost, would take over the provision of all public services.
Well managed by who? Because that's always been the big problem as well. Who's going to be the big brother?
Right. So I wouldn't start out with thinking about Big Brother. I would start thinking about specific applications, which is why the Estonian example is particularly useful. Something like having a well-functioning digital identity scheme is likely to be less controversial than the provision of a lot of other public services. Don't think of this as an all-or-nothing proposition. Think of this as an idea that should be extended beyond its usual realms of private trade, extended perhaps carefully and piecemeal into public policy, but extended nevertheless.
The next small big brother, actually. So, sorry, Stefan.
Well, first of all, thank you. Halfway through, I wrote down, does he mean Estonia? And I get the concept comparative advantage. What I don't get is where the principle of comparative advantage, that you do that thing which you are able to do better and not all the other things which other people are able to do better. What I'm not sure I understand is how that meets political, national realities. There's a very good example which some people in the room might remember. Former Prime Minister of Australia understood that Australia has extraordinary geological comparative advantage. It's the stablest place on the planet. Sure. Being stable and being largely not very well populated in its middle, it's the world's best and safest place to put toxic waste. Okay? Perfect example of comparative advantage. He announced that Australia would create $1 trillion economy taking the world's toxic waste on the principle of comparative advantage. The only problem was not that the principle of comparative advantage doesn't work, but the Australians thought it was a really bad idea. This is a true story. This is a true story from 10 years ago. How do you envisage overcoming, once you get past the rational notion that Estonians should do cybersecurity and online voting and the British should do coalition government. Once you get beyond that, how do you go about persuading people?
Right. So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about the political mechanisms that would make decisions about...
When economics meets people, culture, politics, reality, and they say, yeah, but we want our own system for tax collection. We don't want the Estonian tax collection system.
Right. I think that's one of the argument you make is a good argument in favor of doing this incrementally. So again, don't think about extending this immediately to every facet of public policy. Think about relatively uncontroversial, relatively popular interventions first as a test case. You put it to the public, chances are that the public of a country where the citizens see that their country just doesn't have a certain ability, and there's another country that can provide it, and it can do it cheaply, might be willing to take that risk. Now, having experienced the benefits of this, next time there's a vote about something similar, you already have a baseline you can use in arguing your case. Now, I suspect that you will never get to the point where your citizens will vote for, collecting toxic waste in their own country, but you might get to certain relevant policy areas that might seem unlikely if you were to announce them today, but which may become more acceptable down the line once the first test cases have proven successful.
By the way, I want to point out to Stefan that European breweries already see toxic waste in Australia in the form of Foster's Lager. But a quick question, actually, for Marek. Sorry, my Australian friends are going to hate me.
It's South African, by the way, now.
Oh, really? I'm so sorry.
Brewery. Took it over from the Australians.
It's S.A.B. Miller, isn't it?
A quick question, really. I may be missing something here. When it comes to, for example, provision of services and so on, how does this really differ from existing models of outsourcing and kind of migrant labor forces that go and do things?
Right. That's why this is a small idea. There's really nothing different in principle about what I'm proposing to what you see in international trade, to what governments already do, but what tends to be limited to military cooperation. So think about the splitting of duties and responsibilities within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, since 2010, since the Lisbon Summit of 2010, NATO has had a smart defense policy where the alliance divides up responsibilities across countries. So you end up with countries like Slovakia being responsible for removing landmines, and say the Czech Republic responsible for anti-chemical warfare. There's nothing different about the principle that stands behind what I'm proposing compared to what we already know from domains other than public services.
Is there anything that can avoid a domination of those kind of groups, such as, I mean, NATO is very dominated by, for example, the US and certain powers in Europe. How can you avoid this kind of over-domination of by one particular group?
Right. So I'll interpret your question as a question about the political mechanism that will somehow divide up the duties across countries. Obviously, because we're talking about the private sector, there's really no market mechanism to do it for you automatically. So there's no invisible hand that will do this. There will have to be a political agreement. Now, I admit that that is probably the most difficult part of my proposal. It will probably necessitate a greater degree of sharing of fiscal burdens. There will have to be an agreement, which again can start from very small piecemeal interventions among several countries, where there's an agreement about a common pool of funding that will get allocated to one country's provision of a particular public service based on some mechanism that might be reminiscent of procurement for private corporations, for instance.
You know, I was just thinking of your reference to NATO. You know, people in emerging markets, they call it no action, talk only. So, but we'll put that aside as a question. I'm more intrigued by your idea or your idealistic idea of porous borders, where you travel everywhere
right.
and go where you want and implant your idea where you want.
Sure.
Yeah. Who is going to be setting the prices for these? Because now, if you look at the dominant economies of Americas, in the North in Americas, Britain, Germany, in Europe, South Africa, in Africa, so you are going to end up basically with those big countries, big economies dominating the world again, isn't it? Who's going to set the prices for these services?
Sure, I think it's...
Or equitable prices, I should say, given that the world is full of inequities.
Right. I think opening up, making immigration policies looser might be a good way of improving general social welfare. I would prefer to focus on the proposal in my presentation, but I'm happy to talk to you about immigration after this session.
Okay. No, but your idea, you haven't answered the question, though. The question is, who's going to be setting the prices for these centers of excellences?
Oh,
so
I see.
Is Estonia going to say...
Okay, so you're making an analogy between the immigration scenario and what I propose.
I was just thinking because it's parallel anyway.
Right. There will have to be a mechanism, as I mentioned, reminiscent of procurement competitions, where bids are put in, and the lowest bid is selected subject to some minimum requirements.
Okay, you're an economist, so I'm going to ask you an economist-like question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is your intuition that the efficiencies that this system that you propose will generate is not exceeded by the transaction costs? In other words,
sure.
As soon as I think about this, I think of people saying, well, this is great for voting, but it's not great for tax, or it's great for tax, but it's not great for passports, or it's great for passports, but it's not great for, and so on and so on.
Right.
So by the time you've finished running through this system,
right.
You've acquired a set of costs which you didn't have before, and you've reduced a set of costs which you didn't have before. Are you sure that that comes out positive?
I think there are different types of public services that will come with different sets of transaction costs. So, you know, in things like digital governance, a lot of transaction costs will be fairly low because of the nature of the service.
No, I'm talking about the transaction cost in negotiating between countries.
Sure.
For exceptions to the comparative advantage, purely rational system.
My intuition is that there are almost certainly some policy domains where the benefits that could be obtained are so large that they will outweigh transaction costs.
Okay.
I wouldn't make a general claim, as I've said several times, about this necessarily being the case for every possible policy.
Right. It's interesting and it's clever. My guess is that the invisible hand is going to end up being trumped by the invisible heart.
We're going to leave it there because we have to move on to the next contestant. Marek, thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.
And so to our next video, our next contestant.
I'm Ashwini Nataraja Vanishri. I come from Bangalore. I'm pursuing my PhD in psychology. When I was 5 years old, there used to be a lot of quarrels within families. I really wanted to know why people fight and argue. 10 years from now, I would love to be in a position where we put mental health on platforms where matters relevant to the society are discussed. Economics, politics, everything gets discussed, but somehow mental health is not in the same. Good evening, everyone. My small big idea is called Focus Formula. Mental health issues affect every domain, every nation, irrespective of what the economic statuses of these nations are. Yet one notices how the cause of mental health does not receive enough attention in most of the low and middle-income countries, which I shall be referring to as LAMIC from now on. The term focus is actually an acronym with each alphabet standing for a particular micro-strategy that I believe has the potential to foster mental health promotion in LAMIC. FOCUS. F stands for Flourish Clinics instead of National Institutes for Mental Health. I believe an institution cannot become national because it's the only one in the country. Instead, it becomes national when its reach is national. So therefore, there's a need to create as many micro mental health centers as possible and call them Flourish Clinics in order to deal with the stigma attached to mental illness in most LAMIC. O stands for outsourcing psychotherapeutic skills to smaller communities. Research indicates how, when individuals are provided with empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard, they recover from emotional distress. Therefore, we could be training any formal or informal groups with these psychotherapeutic skills so members can rely on one another for emotional support, especially when there are no mental health professionals in those regions. C stands for culture-specific conceptualization of mental illness. Most LAMICs seem to have adopted diagnostic manuals from developed nations as their own. Now, a global vision to mental health is welcome, but we do need specific micro-strategies, micro-perspectives to make sense of illnesses and treatment plan in order to make the whole process socioculturally relevant. U stands for unassuming philanthropy for mental health cause. Why only grand donations? We could be asking anyone and everyone to donate whatever they can, whenever they can. Even though the funds are likely to come in small, sporadic forms, we might have built a culture of sustainable philanthropy. S stands for skilling individuals the right way. Killing, no, skilling individuals the right way. We could be training children on the skill of emotional awareness the way we teach everything else to children using concentric circle model of teaching. I believe this could be an excellent preventive strategy for mental illness. Now, with a firm belief that small is the new smart, at least where mental health is concerned, I urge you all to consider Focus Formula and, importantly, make mental health your topmost priority. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Gentlemen, any particular questions?
First, I applaud you. Mental illness, mental health is one of the great under-resourced areas in human well-being.
So true.
All over the world, literally all over the world. It is a poorly understood and poorly practiced domain. Can I just check that I understand some things?
Sure.
The word psychotherapeutic is up there. Does that mean that you have a principled approach in mind using psychotherapy as opposed to using, for example, interventions using other methodologies or drugs?
Okay. So what I meant by the term psychotherapeutic skills here is there are various schools of thought when it comes to psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, behaviorism. But what I'm referring to is the humanistic school of thought. Yeah? So research indicates you could be a best psychoanalyst, but if your fundamentals are not based on empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard, one cannot.
Just to be clear, are drugs involved?
Drugs, no. Given that I'm planning to, outsource psychotherapeutic skills, drugs not involved. Yeah.
So, just to push this logic a little bit further.
Sure.
So if I were schizophrenic and a danger to myself, and the only thing, as it were, that mitigated that was whatever treatment I had previously been recommended, this doesn't apply. Is that right?
It may not be entirely applicable, but I wouldn't rule out for the simple fact that it could be a schizophrenic in the family, let's say, or in a small community. If members are aware of these skills, they could be supporting the individual in a better manner. For all you know, outsourcing these skills might actually help him recover or perhaps not make the symptoms even worse.
I don't think, just to clarify, I think what Stefan was asking this is not a replacement for conventional medications and treatments. This is really a new way to look at mental health and prioritize it in order to be able to maximize the impact of treatments and community support. Yeah?
So let's say for an individual living 500 kilometers away from the place where I come from, Bangalore, they might not even have heard of the word schizophrenia, and higher are the chances that throughout the life he may never even consult a psychiatrist or a psychologist for that matter. So if there is a way that we could build these skills within the communities wherever we can, for all you know, maybe we are psychoeducating them and at the same time building the spirit of emotionally supporting one another. Definitely it's not a replacement, no.
Tebe, did you have it?
Like Stefan, I really applaud you on this. And I think this is the phrase you used earlier, that this where one hopes the invisible heart trumps the invisible hand. So I think it's so much more appropriate here. My worry, because this is truly one of those biggest challenges that we have in the world, my worry for you is, and I want to go to that unassuming philanthropy focus, because typically philanthropists like to put their money into their idea, into their area, and they lay the ground rules of how their money is going to be spent. Now, you said something else earlier in terms of creating micro centers. Yep. So how are you going to harmonize the delivery of such an important service, such that the benefits and the benefits are equal across the world? Sure. Seeing that you are going to be working with micro-philanthropists who will be all over with multiple objectives.
Okay. I don't know if there is a superlative degree to the word micro, but if at all I'm the one to coin it, let's say microist. I'll give you an example.
Nano.
Say, for example, this was based on an experiment that I conducted in one of the schools. I spoke to little children regarding an orphanage for mentally retarded kids. Usually what happens, we give them slips wherein these children speak about this to their parents. Maybe parents will hand over 100 rupees or something, and it ends there. So instead, this time what I suggested was, do not consider it to be a donation. Let's say, you wish to eat a chocolate, but there's someone not having clothes? Are you willing to give 50 paise or 1 rupee as opposed to 100 rupees, which might easily come from your dad's pocket, but then that 1 rupee are you willing to give, and you wish to go ahead, there's no time limitation. And throughout that 1 month, we saw how little kids were able to give 50 paise, 1 rupee, 2 rupee. It came in small sporadic forms, but then we had built a culture wherein children actually were thinking about others as well. And we also saw these children became a lot more disciplined. I have a pencil, I wanted a new pencil, but now I'll use the old pencil and I'll donate this 2 rupees. Yeah? I know it's going to be an extremely small amount, but so be it.
Are you saying, in terms of clarification for me, are you saying that there will be a an overarching overseer who sets the guidelines and the rules, and
That's
the
true.
micro philanthropy will be really the collation or the collection of
Absolutely.
the money?
Yeah.
Now, health, every government has got the responsibility to ensure that not only do we have a well-fed, but also a healthy nation. What is the role of government going to be in this? Or are you seeing this as entirely a private sector initiative, or sort of a private individual initiative?
Sure. I would think of it this way. I think for OCU, there's a lot of responsibility riding on mental health professionals. Individually, I can, contribute to culture-specific conceptualization and so on. I think the government has to pitch in for the first and the last one, especially for the first one, I would say. I'm not saying all the 5 would definitely require government support, but specifically, I would say the first one, flourish centers, and to actually start skilling our children from the very beginning. I think we need governmental, the policies.
There's actually an irony in that it was just a couple of years ago, WHO, I was moderating an event, big event, on NCDs, non-communicable diseases, and they suddenly had to backtrack and include mental health because that had been left out. Even though it's a non-communicable disease. So there's a lack of awareness, I agree with you. And I think the thing I'm curious about, to some degree, is the letter C, culture-specific conceptualization of illness and treatment. I know I'm seeing a slow but progress in parts of the Middle East where mental illness and mental health issues have always been tucked away, hidden away. And it's taken a certain amount of education and time for people to say, let's bring this out into the open, discuss it, and that way we can actually treat it rather than hide it and be embarrassed about it. So this issue of destigmatizing, I think, is very important. Talk to me a little bit more about that aspect of what you see happening, because that, I think, is at the foundation of a lot of progress.
That's true. So let's say when I did my master's in psychology, counseling psychology to be, precise, I got trained in Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, and that comes from American Psychiatric Association, And I take programs, and it's part of the syllabus, wherein I have to use DSM-4 and 5, which is a product of American Psychiatric Association's research. We are trained in that, I think sometimes what really happens is you're so overwhelmed by the kind of research it takes to come up with diagnostic manuals such as that instead of drawing inspiration, we start imitating. I think it's too overwhelming, the kind of, the research that goes into, I think most of the LAMIC, they get overwhelmed instead of getting inspired and starting something of their own in terms of understanding culture-specific illnesses and any illness for that matter from the relevant psychosocial, the factors, we simply start imitating, Sometimes my students even say that's the Bible, that's my Bible, they say, American Psychiatric Association, DSM-4 becomes their Bible. So it's unfortunate, but that does not mean at least there is something to go back to. Yeah, in most LAMIC, that's not even there. So I'm not saying let's rule it out, no, let's draw inspiration, but let's not be so happy imitating that we have a big fat text, with us now. That may not help.
Sorry, go on. I was also, another issue is something I saw living 23 years in the United States is the labeling of certain conditions as being mental conditions, if you like. I mean, every child is now almost on Ritalin for attention deficit disorders, and
I know.
and I find that strange that we were just hyperactive kids, or just lively kids, I should say, and now we would have been Ritalin bound if we'd been in this age. So I wonder also how the understanding of mental health has perhaps also gone down the wrong track, certainly among certain cultures.
True.
How do we avoid that? Because that's also a resource drain.
I'm so happy you asked me this. It was almost like I really wanted to speak about this. I just want to give an example to say how we take pride in diagnosing ourselves. Yeah? In India, I think those of you who come from that background, you might know Tare Zameen Par. It was Amir Khan's movie, That movie had a dyslexic child, The place where I practiced the next 1 month, we had any child who would walk in, the parents would have diagnosed him or her to be dyslexic. Yeah? Depression actually is becoming a fashion statement, to say, you know what, I'm depressed. I can't handle relationships because, I'm depressed. I pick a fight because I have, let's say, explosive disorder. Or a child might say, a child saying, I have ADHD, you can't expect me to sit in one place, So therefore, I think self-diagnosis based on, let's say, movies, or I would say I think movies is the shortcuts. So I think there are at times when, because of, these are good information, but when people think that's all there is to it, I think there's a lot of issues. And I would also blame mental health professionals because we sit there, It's such a hierarchy there. We don't want to involve with anyone. Yeah?
But you know very well that this has been going on for hundreds of years. In the 19th century, there were epidemics of what was called traveller's disease, where people would set out from their homes and walk for 200 miles.
True.
And this was a diagnosed condition that people spontaneously got. But that doesn't make the reality of that disease any less acute for the sufferer.
Absolutely.
What it does is it exposes the inadequacy of the system in place to treat that disease.
So true. Yeah.
So, I disagree. I think we should be entirely open and receptive to however people present.
Yeah, but you know what? Sorry. We're talking now. You've done it. I'm kidding. Yeah. Now, I really appreciate you bringing the culture part of it, and I just want to build a little bit on to what Riz Khan was talking about. Now, you've spoken about the one part of the culture, which is the diagnosis, the medical diagnosis. But there's another bigger part of the culture, which is how people acceptability or socialization or around that area. How are you going to rebrand or reframe this illness in such a way that there is one awareness, second understanding, and then third a willingness to participate in this broader initiative, which I think is commendable.
Sure. I would say we need to stop taking a dichotomous approach. Right now, it is illness versus normalcy. I think we have to look at it in a continuum, wherein illness, normalcy to wellness. I think that's where. Just one quick point to the previous comment. When I said an individual, I know the subjective experiences really matter more than anything, But then what I'm really concerned is when an experience is perceived through a self-diagnosis, I think the very experience can become even more painful to the person. That's one thing that, I'm concerned about, but let a child call himself or herself an ADHD kid. That's okay. But because of an erroneous belief as to what ADHD is, there could be a lot of defense mechanisms. And that's the point.
I totally agree with Stefan. There are trends and illnesses that occur. I was just talking about the labeling I experienced in the US. And literally with a minute or two to go, that's another issue, is that there are a lot of vested interests when it comes to mental health, pharmaceutical companies, for example.
Indeed.
So how do we overcome what is an industry in treating mental health rather than simply an actual committed, genuine concern?
Sure, sir. I come from a psychology background, and there is the history of psychiatry versus psychology. The conflict is always there. I have seen so many of my clients, taking a tablet an antidepressant and feeling groggier than ever before, whereas just 1 hour of walk could have done the magic. So therefore, we do see that, but then it's always been the case. Psychiatrists wouldn't even want psychologists or, let's say, psychiatric social workers and counselors. They don't even consider at times in the dialogue because there is an hierarchy that no one speaks about, but it's there. Psychiatrists at the top. I don't know where counseling psychologists even fit there. So there's never an integrative approach to healthcare. And I just would like to quote this person. I mean, I don't know how many of you know, but Vikram Patel, a psychiatrist who's recently been named Time's 100 most influential people. So a psychiatrist, for a psychologist, it might pinch a little, but that's okay. Something good is happening to the mental health field. Something on the lines of when he makes a comment such as, mental health is too precious to be left in the hands of psychiatrists, good. But then it's equally unsafe to leave it with any mental health professional. All that I'm saying is be more inclusive in the manner in which you speak, We are speaking about mental health, and it's not just a psychiatrist's role. It's everyone's. I'm not even saying a mental health professional's role, So there are certain, I would say, internal matters that we need to fix, and, I think that's one of the most needed thing that must happen, internal dialogue.
But it feels like we can leave it in your hands, though.
All right, yeah, so that's good.
Thank
you very much. I certainly know who I'm referring Tebe to later.
For depression.
Exactly. So on to our next video, our next contestant.
Hi, I'm Ludo. I'm at Fordham University. I'm a Fulbright scholar doing a Master's in Economics and a Master's in International Political Economics and Development, focusing on finance. I think as a young child I wanted to be an explorer. I was devastated when I found out that all the continents and all the islands have been discovered. I think if you had unlimited resources you would enact unlimited change, but if I had to choose only one, I would kind of focus on perception in Africa to create a civil society movement to focus on the problems at hand.
Good evening, everyone. I know I'm last, but please pay attention, because I believe that the next small big thing is policy that focuses on the use of menstrual cups. These cups, a silicone sanitary pad alternative, is a feasible but innovative way to include women in our economies and in our societies by ensuring that girls stay in schools and that women are truly part of our labor forces. And it is important that policymakers take note of these cups and also the opportunities that are associated with them. Firstly, we need to recognize that our current development policy is not adequately addressing menstrual health problems. 200 million women each year lose up to 50 days of work or school because of deficient menstrual health management. In my continent, Africa alone, we see that 1 in 10 girls lose 4 days a month. It is unacceptable that women are made to feel shame because they menstruate. We as a society should not tolerate that girls are being left to make makeshift sanitary pads out of leaves, rags, and sometimes even mud. If policymakers are not swayed by the status quo as a moral atrocity, please consider the following economic arguments. The economic problem with sanitary pads is, one, they're often not available, and secondly, if they are, they're too expensive. The financial barriers to menstrual health is costing women and it's costing economies because it's keeping women from not only looking after herself, but her community and being entrenched into the system that generates GDP at the end of the day. We see a case example in Kenya where this works. These cups last up to 10 years. These cups help with development. help with the problem that we see in developing countries where we have waste disposal problems. These cups cost between 2 and 5% of what it would cost the government to provide sanitary pads over a 10-year period. Right. In conclusion, these cups are not just the next small, big thing, because the cups are small, but because of the big impact they could have on the way we treat gender and the way that we treat menstrual health and the associated policy. It can break through stigma. These cups are cost-effective. These cups are a long-run solution and could be an innovative step to start looking at how we can shift gender norms. Adding to this, it is important that these cups change the way we think. This is a very human-based tool to address macroeconomic and macro-humanitarian issues. These cups are not just the next big, small thing. They're part of a larger part of policy that shows we need to change the way we think. Thank you.
There's a little irony in that we've gone with the letters S, R, and U from mental health to menstrual health. It's actually, but it's actually a very, very, very important topic, and I commend you for picking such what initially would raise a lot of eyebrows because they wonder where does this come from. But certainly, I know from having looked into this topic before as well, I think it's a crucial topic. Well done, Ludo, on this. I'm going to open it up for questions to our panelists.
I mean, like the chair, I think thank you. There are no silver bullets. No. But if there were a silver bullet, it would probably look like the education of girls. And all the data are clear that girls drop out of school at the point of menstruation if there isn't support for them. So I completely share this view. If there were one thing that we could do to make the world better tomorrow, it would all be around the education of girls. If they married later, and if we solved the under-resourcing stigmatization of menstruation, the world would be a better place overnight. And I'm proud to say that my colleagues in Oxford have been working on this very thing for a decade or so. And afterwards, I will talk to you about what they've learned.
Well,
I'm agnostic about the means. And I wonder if you could tell us why you choose a cup as opposed to some other solution.
Right. The idea of the cup is that it's small and that it's a way that we can start looking at practical things. Because at the moment, we all know girls are the future, but we're talking about this in broad strokes. We're not getting real practical solutions.
But why not towels, for example? I mean, that's what I mean. What I mean is why a cup as opposed to other forms of...
So, why a cup as opposed to towels?
Yeah.
It costs you 2 to 5%. Governments do not have unlimited resources. If something is cheaper, it's better. Also, looking at the conditions on the ground, I taught math and science in an African township. I saw that the bathroom facilities are not there for the use of sanitary pads. Often rags are used, and this leads to the cleaning of the rags, which means they are left outside, and this is seen by society. The lanterns that are used by schools are a breeding ground for sexual abuse of girls. The cups cut out a lot of these problems. When you don't need to put out rags and a cup is private, you save a girl's dignity. When you don't expose a girl to the lantern, which you need to do the shorter period of time, because the sanitary pads last about 8 hours, this lasts about 12, you get her out of the environment where she could be domestically abused, well, abused sexually. You get her out of an environment where it's a public embarrassment for her to be a woman. And you make this more private, empowering her, because now she's on equal footing with a man.
I'm intrigued. More than half of the world's population is women, are women. The problem you're talking about is a woman's problem.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems...
It's not. It's a man's problem.
Sorry, let's run along with it. Half of the problems that the world has is men making decisions and trying to solve women's problem. My question to you, Ludo, I'm not going to ask whether you've tried it, but but I will ask the role of women in the initiative. Have you had, where are women in this initiative here? Is this another idea by men coming up with the mathematical formula of what, or accounting formula of what works? Or is women have been involved in this initiative, they've tested it? Because it looks like a cup, Lura, and I'm not a woman, but it doesn't look comfortable.
Yeah. Like, I haven't tried this myself, as you said. And, yes, it's a woman's problem. But I believe just because something is not your problem as a man doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt to solve it. Then yes, women and men need to solve it because it's such a critical part. Women will take, I think, just because of the nature of the problem, women will invest into this. We see that some of this NGO movement surrounding this, which is quite small, is driven by some women. My idea is, how do we get it from an NGO where women run it to public policy? How do we upscale this to make a difference?
But also, how do we turn this from a question of menstruation to a question of not only dignity, but everything else? Development, education, all the things that make the world. How many people stay in school? How late do they get married? How do they contribute to the economy? What do they do with the money they earn? How do they relate to migration, conflict, natural resources, food, everything? So this isn't a menstruation problem. This is a human development, human dignity, human flourishing problem.
I've got a follow-up, more practical question. I'm going to ask just practical question because you've gone through. I've seen that cup, by the way, before. And I've always wondered from a hygienic perspective. You know, you said the scientists have told us that the pads do something and they do something. Now, this cup, how are you going to ensure that from a hygiene perspective that this cup, I don't know what to say, us. You know the question.
Yeah, I know the question. So yes, it is a delicate area of the human body. Hygiene is crucial. You need clean water for this cup. The policy areas where it's done is not going to obviously always have clean water. But let's look at the status quo and what we have at the moment. Most likely, rags are being used. You also need more water to clean these rags. Women we see in practice are scared and fearful to put these rags outside to dry. So what they do is they keep it in their houses. It doesn't properly dry, and this is a breeding ground for bacteria. These cups need less water, which means you have more water for your household on a practical level. These cups take less time to dry, which means you don't have the incubation of bacteria. So, no, it's not perfect. Yes, it's better.
How widely is it used? Sorry, Stefan was going to say, so far, I mean, one thing we didn't establish, I guess, or maybe I missed it, is how widely established is the system of use of the cups as opposed to other options?
So, at the moment, we see it's a problem. Over 2 million girls need more access to this. Governments are looking in the way of sanitary pads, which are more expensive. Also, they generate more profits to the person that is making this. I think that's a key issue. There are some case studies, specifically some case studies was done in Kenya, South Africa, and Nepal. So it's more on a village-to-village basis at the moment. So yes, there's some work, but it needs to be upscaled.
Have you thought about the problem of devices in development interventions? Devices have a really bad reputation. As you probably know, every time somebody at Oxford or Harvard invents a water filter that fits in your pocket, or a sanitary towel, or a football that is reinflatable and says, I know what, this will make the world wonderful for people somewhere else, it fails. Okay, and you can guess why by the way I phrased the proposition. Have you thought about the challenge here not being anything to do with devices, but being something to do with people finding their own solution and activism around the destigmatization of the monthly event?
So just, I'm going to ask you, please put your question just in one sentence and put it clear.
Okay, so this is not a question, this is a statement.
Yeah.
Devices have a bad reputation.
Yes.
Okay, the question bit is, did you consider that when you went for a device?
Yes. Sorry, I'm being left to guess a lot of questions. So yes, when I first looked at it, I said, it's a device. It's going to be used probably for 1 month, 2 months, and going to be left. But then I started looking at the data. There was a data study done in Kenya by the African Research Center, and it was asked, if you make this device available, will women use it? 90% of girls and women did. More importantly, month 2, month 3, again, like between 90 and 80% used this again. So it is counterintuitive to me because I know the problem, but in reality on the ground, we see that the need for this is so much that the device problem is overcome. And it's also probable to notice that tampons are also devices, and it's very similar. It's one device for another.
I think what Stefan was getting at to some degree is that often first world interventions done with goodwill end up becoming kind of failures because they don't take into account local environments and so on. In this case, I think the idea is that this works, yeah. Okay. The question here is, and presumably this is something that could also provide industry for production at a local level or something. Is there any kind of extrapolation of the benefit in terms of how do you make this a local industry?
Yes. Like you said, there's no silver bullet. Menstrual cups will not work in every society and every country. I'm not saying this is a blanket policy that we should spread menstrual cups day in and out and say it's going to work. It's going to be focused, it's going to be targeted, and some communities will be better at adopting this than others.
The challenge you're bringing the menstrual challenge you're bringing here is mostly a developing market challenge. I'm not saying only, it's mostly developing market. And I'm going to go back to my very first comment, that in the developing markets, our biggest problems are about food on the table, a roof over our head, and all those. Then I'm going to go to Ashwini's comment. Why do you need governments and policies around this? Is there no way we can go is there no way we can look in private sector or philanthropy as a solution, or look to the individual? Why do you want, if this is such a good idea, such a necessary idea, why do we need a policy around it and rather than action?
Right. I think firstly we need to recognize there's already policy. We are trying to provide sanitary pads. This is just cheaper. Secondly, you can argue that there's a big market. You might get a small amount because it's a poor market per device. Ultimately, this is a self-cannibalizing device. Because you sell it, you cannot resell it because the product works too long. It's not, a company can't sell these things because it can only not sell one product every 10 years. A business model won't work. When business models fail, and it's in such benefit of society, that is where governments need to step in. And this is why this is a policy measure, not a...
So this is a solution, not a commercial venture, in effect? This is what
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I wasn't even saying it's a commercial venture, because that's why I linked it to philanthropy in terms of the heart triumphing over the head, if you will. And that's just what I'm worried about. I think it's a commendable initiative. It's just, why do we need governments? Because wherever governments are involved, that's when disasters begin, isn't it?
Or where they're not, sometimes.
Or where they're not.
I'm not going to propose that we strike down all governments. Governments have a role, although I'm not fond of them. So we need government because this is a problem. This is a problem now. Do we need private sector to invest? Yes. I've called up the girls and the women running and making these cups. They said, yes, you know what, Ludo? This is so important, we'll give you some of these cups. Do something. This problem is so grave and so important that we would be reckless not to ask private sector to help, not to ask government to help, not to ask international government to help.
All right, Ludo, thank you very much. Well done. So, ladies and gents, I'm going to ask you to get your smartphones. You'll see on the screens in a moment where you should go, so to speak, to vote. So there you have the ideas. Two options for live voting. Do get out those phones. You can either go to the website, the symposium website, sympsg//vote, VOTE. simp.sg/vote will give you an option to vote on one of those. We want basically to have you to vote essentially on the two leading ideas that you feel should go forward to further discussion tomorrow at the follow-up session. So that's one option. Or you can send a text message with SGS45, and then the keyword would be the two, would be one actually. You have to send two messages, I guess, I don't know, but of the names, and you see them spelled below for either Martha, Marek, Ashwini, or Ludovicus. So send an SMS, the text, SGS45, and then the name for it, or you can go and vote at the website. So we've got a couple of minutes to get that, so please do it promptly. It'll take a couple of minutes to collate the information, and we should have a result. In the meantime, I do invite our judges, if they have any more questions for all of our panelists. It's an interesting situation we have here, actually, because we've gone down, if you like, a division of almost two what you'd consider practical solutions as we see them, looking at mental health, looking at menstrual health, in one case a device, one case a system. The idea of big data technology, a rethink of how we look at intelligence and information and how it's utilized. And of course, we have the idea of labor and how it can be restructured in such a way that across borders we might find a better system to utilize skill sets. So kind of interesting range, and I have to commend all four panelists, all four contestants, for really smart ideas. We've covered a lot of ground, and it just shows if we had people like this running the world, we might be in a better way. Okay, so please do vote. Do it as quickly as possible, and we should have information fairly soon. I'm sort of guessing that most people have. I guess we'll get a notice when we get. Sorry, go ahead, please. So can we get the microphone live for Tebe, please?
This, we spoke about policy and all, and the need for everybody to get involved. What have you done to try and get this idea on running? I mean, what have you done other than individual activism? What have you done in terms of saying, you know what, I'm going to take it upon myself. This is such an important idea. I'm going to get it going.
If we can put the microphones live, we can hear the contestants too, please.
What have I done? Well, I'm here talking about it. Secondly, I phoned up companies that make these devices. Now, it is a very profitable industry because this device doesn't cost much to make, but you can sell it for a pretty penny. And I asked, guys, what are you doing? Why can't you help? And I must say that I kind of talked to these guys, and they said, yes, let's start. And they have commitments from one of the biggest suppliers of the company to give me these cups to not only look at how to implement it on a pilot project, because pilot projects are done, but to do a pilot project that is focused on policy. And so this is where I've come. I've been doing this for 2 months, which is not a lot of time given the grand scale of the problem, but we're getting somewhere.
Stefan, please.
Can I tell you some things that I loved and some things that I loved less?
Please.
Is that permissible?
Yeah, no, we should. Yeah. I told you you're the troublemaker.
The thing that I loved about everyone, about all four of you, is that the next big thing was meaningful. Okay? Yeah. It wasn't likely to be successful, but actually likely to impoverish our experience of the world. It made me feel that your generation is seriously engaged with questions that are non-trivial. Okay? Not that creating the next Facebook or the next Twitter is trivial, but compared to the order of things that you're addressing, kind of is trivial. Okay? So I thought that was astonishing. And I also thought the fact that each of you, although none of you described yourselves like this, what each of you is really trying to do is to be a kind of activist, is to say, look, people, this stuff's important. Data is critically important, and our relationship with it as it accumulates is critically important. The provision of public services is broken, okay? Precisely because when politics meets economics, politics wins, and politics is economically illiterate. Mental health is one of the key questions in the world, okay? Where nowhere, neither developed nations nor developing nations, are even remotely up to solving it. And the question, as I hinted earlier on, of getting more girls into school and getting them to stay there longer is a question of economics. You know, everything gets better if that happens. Everything everywhere gets better if that happens. So even if you were morally neutral, that would be pretty important. So that's what I loved. What I loved less was I thought all of you were much stronger on diagnosis than prognosis. In other words, all of you were better at saying, look, we got a problem, and you know, I know we need an idea to address the problem, but for all kinds of good and obvious reasons, they maybe didn't match. And then I think the thing that I care most about was the question of culture and stories. Okay? Nothing works, even when it's the best solution to any given problem, unless people engage with it. And people engage with stories, and they engage. You can't engage on their behalf.
There's also an interesting thing here, and I spent yesterday with the 4 contestants filming the little sort of biopic films to introduce them. Had no idea about their particular areas of interest in the essay, so for me it was all from scratch too. But it's interesting to note, and it's just an observation, in each case, the topic covered was something very related to the area in which those individuals, I don't know if that's me or someone else, in terms of their particular, environments. Ludo, of course, in South Africa, or in South Africa. Oh, sorry, folks. Now I feel like Elvis. So Ludo, for example, with his experience of the environment in the African culture, sees that particular problem is associated with that. Ashwini with India and seeing the mental health situation, obviously that. Of course, Marek with his view on what he sees, for example, in his country, in the example of Estonia. Someone's really losing me today. And of course, Marta with her the kind of experience she's had also, Denmark, Scandinavia, Sweden, Swedish upbringing. So it's interesting, a lot of the subjects, which I'm not having seen a lot of the other essays, I don't know if that also was the case, but it's interesting people approach the problems or the next small big thing from their perspective too, which is also interesting. So I think, do we have the results? Let's see if we've got some results here.
I just want to... Whoa!
Okay.
That's exactly what I would have done. No, I'd have reversed the bottom too.
So for those of you who can't read the board from here, it's, we've got 12% for Marta's idea, 7% for Marek, 50% for Ashwini, 32% for Ludo. It does mean that tomorrow, as you, if you go to the follow-up session, it will be Ashwini's and Ludo's 2 topics that will be discussed. That's going to be on the ground floor in the main building at 12:30. The main area where you can go down to do the follow-up discussion. So do that, actually. That'll be a nice way to actually follow up and see where the ideas go to. But, as I always like to point out, I don't know if many of you followed the news lately, apart from all the terrible things that have been happening, another piece of news that came in was that Hot Chocolate, the 70s and 80s band lead singer Errol Brown died. But I want to quote him and say that everyone's a winner. So a round of applause for all the people who were in the contest.